Picture the boardroom of a global corporate titan, suddenly crushed under unimaginable pressure. Today, in this explainer, we're unpacking one of the most critical leadership tests in corporate history, Boeing, and the intense, high-stakes decision-making that unfolded right after the devastating 737 MAX incident. This isn't just a story about airplanes, It's a gripping narrative about what happens when the very foundation of a legendary company is shaken right to its core.
So, what actually happens when a single product failure spirals into a full-blown global crisis? It's a terrifying scenario for any business leader. Usually we think of product failures as isolated things, right? A bad batch of electronics, or maybe a software glitch patched quietly overnight. But what happens when that product is a commercial airliner? You've got hundreds of passengers soaring at 30,000 feet, and a failure cascades across the globe. The stakes instantly shift from operational hiccups to literal life-and-death consequences. It sets the stage for a seriously dramatic corporate survival story.
And the aftermath? It was monumental. We're talking billions of dollars just evaporating from the balance sheet. Entire fleets of aircraft were ordered out of the sky, grounded worldwide, just sitting idle on tarmacs from Seattle to Singapore. But honestly, the most devastating blow of all was the loss of decades of hard-earned consumer trust, just severely damaged in the blink of an eye. So the central question we have to ask is, did Boeing's leadership actually manage this cascading crisis effectively? Or did their heat-of-the-moment decisions just make everything worse?
Section 1. The Catalyst. The Race for Efficiency.
Every crisis has an origin story, and this one starts with an intense, ticking clock race for market dominance. The commercial aviation industry is basically a massive high-stakes duopoly. On one side, you had Airbus. They just introduced these highly fuel-efficient aircraft, offering significantly lower operating costs for airlines, which was a huge existential threat to Boeing's market share. Boeing's answer? The 737 MAX promise. It was an aircraft engineered specifically to match that crucial fuel efficiency and win back their competitive edge. The financial pressure to deliver this quickly and flawlessly was absolutely immense.
Right at the center of this unfolding tragedy was a system called MCAS. Originally, it was just designed as a background software system to aid flight dynamics and compensate for the MAX's new, larger engines. But critical design flaws, which were heavily compounded by severe gaps in pilot training, turned this single piece of code into the nucleus of two catastrophic crashes. A technical vulnerability rapidly transformed into a global nightmare, leaving the entire aviation community in absolute shock.
Section 2. The Pressure Cooker. A global fleet grounded.
Just like that, the theoretical race for efficiency was over. The brutal reality of a global crisis was here, and the escalation was terrifyingly fast. Hour 0, the unimaginable happens. By day 1, the unprecedented occurs. Every single 737 MAX aircraft is grounded globally by aviation authorities. Jump to week 1, and the spotlight is blinding with intense regulatory scrutiny from all over the world. By month 1, the company is drowning in escalating legal investigations and spiraling reputational damage. The clock was ticking mercilessly, and the decisions made in these first few days and weeks would permanently define everything that followed.
Section 3. The Leadership Challenge.
Think about the sheer weight of responsibility shifting directly from the engineering floor right into the executive boardroom. Leadership wasn't just fighting one fire. They were standing in an inferno of conflicting priorities. First, you have safety versus business continuity. Grounding the aircraft indefinitely meant hemorrhaging massive financial losses, putting the whole enterprise at risk. But pushing to keep flying, that risked even more devastating, unforgivable damage. Second, transparency versus reputation protection. Exactly how much internal info do you disclose to the public, and how fast? And finally, regulatory alignment. They had to navigate all this while global aviation regulators watched their every move under intense scrutiny. This wasn't just a technical crisis anymore. It had completely morphed into a crisis of leadership.
Section 4. Strategic Trade-offs and Missteps.
Look, in a crisis of this magnitude, there are rarely easy, clear-cut right answers. There are only deeply flawed options with massive consequences. Boeing leadership basically had to walk an impossible tightrope between two distinctly difficult paths. Option 1 was immediate transparency. That means full disclosure, proactively pushing to ground the planes and taking strong, immediate accountability. The huge risk there? A severe, immediate hit to their reputation and stock price. Then there was option 2, a controlled response. This meant gradual communication, desperately trying to protect the brand image, and attempting to manage the media narrative. The massive risk here? is a catastrophic long-term loss of trust if the true severity of the issues comes out later. It's the ultimate challenge, trying to balance speed, accuracy, and stakeholder confidence while it feels like the sky is literally falling.
So, as the pressure inside that boardroom reached an absolute boiling point, they had to take definitive steps to mitigate the situation. First, they deployed immense engineering resources to implement software fixes and fundamentally redesign the problematic systems at the heart of MCAS. Next, leadership actively engaged with global aviation regulators, systematically mapping out a very long path forward to recertification. And finally, recognizing they desperately needed a profound shift in direction, significant leadership changes were executed at the highest levels of the company. And remember, every single one of these steps was taken under the crushing weight of global scrutiny.
But despite all that, the overarching critique of Boeing's crisis management ultimately comes down to one really harsh reality. Delay often amplifies damage. Critics strongly argue that the initial responses deeply lacked transparency. Instead of getting ahead of the story and being rigorously proactive, corporate communication was perceived as incredibly reactive. They always seemed to be one step behind the developing news cycle. And in the brutal arena of crisis management, failing to act swiftly and transparently acts as a massive amplifier for the damage being done to the brand and, much more importantly, to the victims' families.
Section 5. Lessons in Crisis Leadership.
Now we get to the hard-won truths for any industry navigating the abyss. First up, true crisis leadership absolutely requires speed and transparency. You just can't wait for perfect, sanitized information to communicate. You have to own the narrative immediately and honestly. Second, trust is significantly harder to rebuild than revenue. You can eventually engineer a way back to profitability, but once the public doubts your fundamental integrity, that takes decades of flawless execution to repair. And third, technical problems become leadership failures when they're mismanaged. A software glitch is a tragedy, for sure, but trying to manage the narrative around it instead of prioritizing pure safety, that is a profound failure of leadership. In high-stakes industries, safety is not just an operational priority. It's not just some box the engineering department checks before rollout. It is a strategic imperative. It absolutely has to be the core pillar of the business model itself. The experience here shows us, in agonizing detail, that when safety is compromised for the sake of efficiency or market share, every single subsequent decision gets magnified under an unforgiving microscope. The next time a massive company faces an existential crisis, and let's be real, there will definitely be a next time, remember this core truth. It's not the crisis itself that defines a company or its leaders. Every organization, no matter how legendary, faces adversity. What defines them, permanently and completely, is how they respond when the pressure is at its absolute highest. So when the ultimate crisis arrives at your doorstep, how will you respond?